Good morning, atheists, agnostics, skeptics, whatever you like to call yourselves, you are welcome here. At Seattle Atheist Church, we call ourselves an atheist church because you will never hear anything supernatural talked about from the podium. So today's talk is on the book Stumbling on Happiness by Daniel Gilbert. And one of the things I thought was interesting about the book is it doesn't seem to be as directly about happiness as the title would have you think that it would be. And in my reading somewhere I came across the phrase stumbling on happiness, but it didn't even stand out enough for me to mark it, what was that about stumbling on happiness. But basically he asks, do you know what will make you happy? And then he pretty much has research to show that, no, you don't. He's a Harvard psychologist who researches affective forecasting, how you predict you will feel in the future, and how similar or dissimilar that is to how you will actually feel when the time comes. So human beings spend a lot of time imagining the future. And the way that we think about the future is wrong. We can't imagine the future very well, so what we do is we fill in the gaps with our how we feel about the present, or what we think about the present. So here's an example. He suggests you look at illustrations from science fiction books that were written in the 1960s. My favorite example would be the cartoon The Jetsons. The Jetsons actually came out in 1962, and it was the first color broadcast, which is kind of interesting. It went off the air in about 1987, so I don't know how many people remember the Jetsons. But when I went back and started looking at some images from the Jetsons, the most interesting thing that I found is that George Jetson sits in front of a screen all day as he's doing his work. So that was very prescient. And in the Jetsons, there are jetpacks, flying cars, gizmos for personal grooming, Skype-type telephones, which were called visiphones, and personal androids. So we're not actually far away from those things. But what is most interesting to Gilbert about the retro future is the things that are missing, the things that we couldn't even imagine. So there are no cell phones, no one doing yoga, no commuters on bikes, no interracial or gay neighbors, and no women executives, right? In fact, no women were really working at all in the show. So what we imagine as the future will not be the actual future. What we imagine is highly influenced by our present. So just stop and sort of let that sink in for a bit. So my wonder is that if I want the freedom to really think about the future, maybe what I should do is start thinking about my present and then asking myself what elements might change, or even that I could imagine being different somehow. Otherwise, we just have a future which is really created by the present, and we're not even aware that we're doing it. Now, Dan Gilbert made some commercials for Prudential Insurance. I don't know if anybody remembers those, but he's in a park somewhere and he's talking to passerbys about saving for retirement. And on one of them, he has this big wall and he asks people to put magnets on the wall. There's part of the wall is labeled the past and part of the wall is labeled the future. And on the, there are some blue magnets which represent negative life events, the loss of a loved one, the loss of a job. And there are some bright yellow magnets which are things that people are looking forward to. So things like having a party, graduating from college, or whatever. And what you can see when you kind of move away from this wall is that in the past there's about equal amounts of positive and negative blue and yellow magnets, but that people expect their future, the only thing in the future are yellow magnets. Okay? So this is the optimism bias that people have. And when we make plans for our futures, we assume that our future will be like our present. So the decision to do things like drop out of college or quit a stressful job which we might regret in 10 years, based on how we feel about it right now is how we make our decision. And he wants you to think not so much about yourself, but he wants to have you imagine the lives of other people. Sort of like, what if other people did it? And on average, the decision you're making right now, will it be helpful if someone else were choosing it? And also, when we think about really bad things happening to us, so first we just assume that bad things won't happen to us. That's the first cognitive bias mistake we make. But when we're asked to think about if something bad happens to us, really bad things, the loss of a loved one, suffering a violent assault, we assume that in the future we're going to feel about it the way we feel today. So we predict, I could not go on. I would be sad for the rest of my life. And the bias that the future resembles the present is working against us there, because people are affected by negative events, but just not as much and not as long as they think that they will be. Statistically speaking, the thing that follows great loss is actually resilience. You will pull out of your painful funk. You will get back to life as normal. And this is the part that I feel really uncomfortable saying, but he goes on to even say that in most cases, when there's real tragedy, people later report that their lives were actually enhanced by the negative event. Okay? When people are asked to predict how they will feel about things that they can imagine happening in the future, they get it wrong. When people are given a chance to make a choice today and predict how happy they will be about the choice in the future, people usually guess incorrectly. And one of the ways that you can increase your chance of feeling happy about the choices you make is to believe your choices are permanent. So that's kind of the opposite of what most people think. You might think if you thought it wasn't permanent, then you might be happier because you always kind of have an escape clause. Here's an example. Here's an experiment they did. They set up a fake photography class at Harvard, and they told people they were teaching them how to use a darkroom. And then they asked people to select their 2 favorite photographs. Half of the students were told that they needed to choose one of these 2 favorites and give it back to the program. But they could take one of them home forever. They could just have it. Half of the students were told that at any time they could swap the pictures. Picture you took home, if in the future you want to exchange it and get your other picture, you could swap them. But the students who believed that their choice was final were happier than those who believed that they could swap the pictures. And so this is an example of how having more than one option, having too many options, can actually make you be less satisfied with your choice. So just this last Sunday, I was in a bakery and I overheard this woman saying to a small child of about 4, "It's always more fun when you can select your own treat." But that is not necessarily so. When I was a kid, my grandmother, did the shopping, we ate at home, and she usually alternated between 2 brands of cookies. There were those crunchy, dry Chips Ahoy cookies, and those waxy, vanilla-scented, pink and white, animal-shaped cookies, okay? And I still remember those cookies. They're not the best cookies by far that you can find in Seattle, but I love those cookies. And I know that in this, here, we've had people talk about the Barry Schwartz talk on TED, the TED Talk, that too many choices actually can cause us anxiety and dissatisfaction with whatever we've chosen. We worry that we've made the right choice. And actually it can result in the melting down of a small child in front of the display case because they too many choices, right? Now, Daniel Gilbert has discovered something that helps. He discovered that once the choice has been made, people tend to believe whatever choice they made is a good one. So the problem for us is if we keep switching things around, then we can't get settled onto any one choice. But once we've decided, we can relax into things. In an experiment also at Harvard, they asked people to rate some posters by how appealing they were, and then some of them were given a poster selected by the experimenter. Then they were asked to rank the posters again. So this time, the poster the subject had been given now was ranked higher, more attractive. Those decisions that are final, without even realizing it, we decide to be happy with our choice. And so one possibility is that we make a decision and stick with it and close the door on other possibilities. Bizarrely, they actually did that experiment in a hospital where there were people who were suffering from some sort of brain damage where they couldn't remember, they had memory loss. And even for people who couldn't remember that they had chosen a particular picture later, but they were given something else, later the one that they were given had rose in their estimation. So he makes a distinction between natural happiness and synthetic happiness. So natural happiness is, that's our intuitive sense of happiness. You're happy with your choice. Synthetic happiness is when we don't get what we want, but we decide that we are happy anyway, ultimately. And Daniel Gilbert points out most people don't really believe in synthetic happiness when we hear other people tell about it. So, for example, there was another Beatle. There were several other Beatles, 2 or 3, from the ones that we think of as the Beatles. But there was this guy who was replaced by Ringo just before the Beatles made it big. And now he claims that he's really happy with the way things turned out. Wouldn't have wanted it any other way. And often when people hear that story, they kind of groan. And they think, it can't really be true that this guy is happier the way things turned out. So first thing that Daniel Gilbert points out is, who would know if he was happy better than him? And then I want to question this idea of synthetic happiness and wonder if it really is different than natural happiness. For example, I didn't know before what would make me happy, but now I can see that this is making me happy. It's just regular happy, not synthetic happy. And I didn't have to adjust my expectations to be happy, but I just am in fact happy. So in my little thought experience, this guy's name was Pete Best. So Pete Best, he's not actually happy about not being a Beatle, but he is happy that he had 50 years of a happy married life. He has strong relationships with his children, and he's happy that he never became involved with drugs. So my reading about Pete Best, evidently one of the things was that Pete Best never engaged in taking drugs when the other Beatles were doing it. And maybe he realized that if he had done that, it would be disastrous for him. Maybe he had something in his family history or whatever. He knew he just couldn't mess around with drugs. Maybe he's focusing on the good, or maybe it really was good that he never became a Beatle. Synthetic happiness is a feeling that is just as real as natural happiness. And I am not sure if they really are two different things. Daniel Gilbert thinks they are. Now, to borrow Daniel Dennett's thought experiment, if you were hypnotized and told to wake up, and that when you wake up you're going to be in pain, and you wake up and you experience a pain, is that pain? If you were told that when you wake up you will believe you are in pain, and you wake up and you believe you are in pain, is that pain? And the question is, how do these pains differ? Now, the answer to that question probably won't matter to you as much as your own subjective experience of pain. And for Gilbert, if you think you are happy, you are. Even if a whole lot of people tell you that your life couldn't possibly make you happy. They can't imagine your life making you happy because they can't imagine it making them happy. So for example, many people can't imagine co-joined twins living happy lives. And we as a society are willing to risk the lives of twins to separate them. But co-joined twins, about 100% of the time, will tell you that they don't want to change that aspect of themselves. And I think, this is just me, I think maybe that's how people thought of gay people 50 years ago. You tell me you're happy, but I think you'd be happier if you were just different. Who knows better what makes someone happy than those people themselves? So that's one thing that Daniel Gilbert is asking. So one of the ways to affect your subjective experience of happiness, according to Daniel Gilbert, is to believe that your choice is final. We have a psychological immune system which adjusts our thinking and causes us to believe that things are better than we otherwise worried they would be or feared that they would be. So what does this mean in terms of practical applications and all of that? So I was only able to I wasn't able to complete this whole book, but I read about half of the 300-page book and watched his TED Talk videos. He's super kind of accessible reading if somebody is interested in reading him. He kind of reads more like Malcolm Gladwell, something like that. And so now we still have some time for putting our chairs in a circle and having a conversation. I will close the way I always do. Atheists believe in good because good works in non-mysterious ways.